I was living alone in my small apartment. It was a quiet place, perfect for studying and relaxing. One rainy evening, I was reading a book on my couch. The sound of the rain hitting the windows was soothing. I loved the smell of rain and the way it made everything feel calm. My phone suddenly rang. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7 p.m. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. "Hello," I said. There was a strange silence on the other end. Then a soft, shaky voice spoke. "Is this Emma?" "Yes, it is." "Who is this?" I asked, feeling a bit confused. "This is your great-grandmother, dear," the voice said. My heart skipped a beat. My great-grandmother Edith had passed away many years ago. This had to be a prank. "Who is this?" I asked again, trying to sound firm. "Emma, you must tell Essie it's time to come home," the voice insisted. There was something eerie about the way she said it. I felt a chill run down my spine. My great-grandmother passed away years ago. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, Emma, tell Essie it's time," the voice repeated before the line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. Who was this person, and why were they pretending to be my great-grandmother? I put the phone down and tried to shake off the strange feeling. I didn't know anyone named Essie, and I couldn't understand why someone would call me with such a message. Hours passed, and I tried to focus on my book again, but the phone call kept replaying in my mind. I decided to call my mother. Maybe she knew who Essie was. "Mom, do you know anyone named Essie?" I asked when she picked up. My mom was quiet for a moment. "Essie was your grandmother's nickname. Her real name was Estelle." I felt a shiver go through me. But why would someone call me about her? "It was a strange call, Mom. They said it was time for Essie to come home." My mom didn't say anything for a few seconds. "Emma, that's very odd. Your great-grandmother used to call your grandmother Essie, but she's been gone for decades." I felt my stomach twist in knots. "Mom, what if it was her, great-grandma Edith, trying to tell us something?" "Don't be silly, Emma. It was probably just a prank. Don't think too much about it," my mom said, trying to reassure me. We talked for a bit longer before hanging up. I tried to push the strange call out of my mind, but it lingered there like a dark cloud. Later that night, I got another call. This time it was my mom again, but her voice was shaky. "Emma, I have some bad news. Grandma passed away a few hours ago." I felt the room spin. "What? How? When?" I stammered. "She was at home. They think it was a heart attack. It happened around the same time you got that call," my mom said, her voice breaking. Tears filled my eyes. "Mom, do you think it was her? Great-grandma Edith trying to warn us?" "I don't know, Emma. It's so strange, but we have to stay strong. Grandma would want us to," she said softly. I hung up and sat in silence, the eerie phone call playing over and over in my mind. My great-grandmother had passed away long before I was born, but I had heard stories about her. She was a strong, loving woman who cared deeply for her family. Could it have been her voice on the phone, trying to send a message from beyond? The next few days were a blur. We had to arrange the funeral and deal with the shock of losing Grandma. I couldn't shake the feeling that the phone call was more than just a coincidence. At the funeral, I looked around at my family. Everyone seemed to be in a daze, dealing with their grief in their own ways. I kept thinking about what the voice had said. "Tell Essie it's time to come home." It felt like a message, a sign that Grandma was now with her mother, my great-grandmother. I sat on my couch, the events of the past few days weighing heavily on me. I picked up my phone and looked at the call log. The number that had called me was unknown, untraceable. I decided to do some research on paranormal experiences. I found stories of people receiving messages from loved ones who had passed away. Some believed these messages were signs of love and protection, letting us know that our loved ones were still with us in spirit. I thought about Grandma and great-grandma Edith. Maybe the phone call was their way of saying goodbye. of letting us know that they were together now. It was a comforting thought, even if it was a bit eerie. From that day on, I kept my phone close, wondering if I would ever receive another mysterious call. The experience left a lasting impression on me, a reminder that sometimes the line between this world and the next is thinner than we think. One day when I was young, I decided to help my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, rake leaves in his yard. Mr. Thompson was an older man who lived alone. He always had a kind smile and was very friendly. It was a bright, cool autumn day, and the leaves fell everywhere. The air was crisp and the ground was covered with red, yellow, and orange leaves. It was fun to gather the leaves into big piles. The sound of the leaves crunching under my feet was satisfying. After we finished, Mr. Thompson thanked me and offered to walk me home. It was only a short walk to my house. As we walked, we talked about various things like school and my favorite games. I felt happy and safe walking with Mr. Thompson. When we got to my house, everything seemed normal. My parents were not home, but that was usual. They often went out for errands on Saturdays. I had a key to let myself in, so I unlocked the door and stepped inside with Mr. Thompson right behind me. As soon as we entered, I heard something strange. It sounded like my mom's voice coming from upstairs. She was humming a familiar tune she often sang while cleaning. It was so clear and unmistakable that I called, "Mom, are you home?" There was no answer. Mr. Thompson and I exchanged puzzled looks. "Are you sure your mom is home?" he asked. I shook my head, feeling a bit confused and uneasy. "No, my parents went out. They said they wouldn't be back for a while." We stood in the hallway listening carefully. The humming continued, drifting down from the second floor. It was eerie and unexplainable. My heart started to race. I decided to call my dad to check. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number, my hands shaking a little. "Dad, are you and Mom home?" I asked when he answered. My dad's voice was calm. "No, we're still out running errands. We won't be back for another hour." "Why do you ask?" I told him about the humming we were hearing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you heard humming?" he finally asked. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, I'm sure. Mr. Thompson heard it too." My dad sounded concerned. "Stay outside until we get back. Don't go upstairs. Just wait outside, okay?" I agreed, and we quickly left the house. We stood in the front yard, staring at the house, which now felt cold and unwelcoming. As we waited, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The neighborhood was quiet, the leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and the sky was turning gray as clouds moved in. The once beautiful day now felt dark and foreboding. I glanced at Mr. Thompson, who was looking at the house with a serious expression. It made me feel a bit safer knowing he was with me. Time seemed to crawl as we stood there, watching the house. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept expecting to see someone appear in the window or hear another strange sound, but nothing happened. The humming had stopped as soon as we left the house. Finally, my parents' car pulled into the driveway. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They got out of the car looking worried. My dad came over and hugged me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, though I still felt a bit shaken. "We heard the humming coming from upstairs," I told him again. "It sounded just like Mom." My dad looked at the house, then back at me. "Let's go inside and check it out together," he said. My mom and Mr. Thompson followed us. We all walked in together, my dad leading the way. The house was silent now, but the feeling of unease lingered. We went upstairs, checking each room carefully. Everything was exactly where it should be. There was no sign of anyone else being in the house. My mom and dad looked at each other, puzzled. "There's no one here," my mom said softly. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It didn't make any sense. Both Mr. Thompson and I had heard the humming so clearly. It was as if someone had been there, but now they were gone. The experience left us all feeling unsettled and confused. After thoroughly checking the house and finding nothing, My parents thanked Mr. Thompson for his help, and he left. I stayed close to my parents for the rest of the day, still feeling a bit scared and uneasy. The mysterious presence in our empty house was something I couldn't forget. That night as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about what had happened. The house was quiet now, but every little sound made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been there. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but it was hard to believe. The experience taught me to always trust my instincts and to be cautious. Even now, as I look back on that day, I can't explain what we heard. It remains a mystery, a strange and eerie memory from my childhood. And every autumn, when I hear the leaves rustling, I'm reminded of that day and the mysterious presence in our home. Before we get into the next story, if you are here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. Late one night, I was alone at home. My parents had gone out for the evening, and my little sister was staying at a friend's house. I was a young teen then, around 14 years old. The house was quiet, and I could hear the ticking of the clock in the living room. It was a cozy two-story house in a peaceful neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and a well-kept lawn. I had finished my homework early and decided to spend some time chatting with my friends online. I went up to my room, closed the door, and turned on my computer. The glow of the screen lit up my room as I logged into the chat room where my friends and I often hung out. We talked about school, shared funny videos, and played games together. It was a typical night, or so I thought. As the night went on, one of my online friends who went by the name Shadow Walker started to act strangely. Shadow Walker was someone I had met online a few months ago. We had never met in person, but we chatted often. That night, Shadow Walker seemed to know a lot about what I was doing. He commented on the blue shirt I was wearing and even mentioned the snack I had just eaten, a bag of chips that I had grabbed from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe I had told him about my favorite shirt before, or perhaps he had seen me eating chips in a photo I posted. But then he started to get more specific. He described the way I was sitting in my chair, the posters on my walls, and even the way I had tied my hair in a ponytail. My heart began to race as I realized that Shadow Walker was describing things he shouldn't have been able to see. I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked around my room trying to find any sign that someone was watching me. The windows were closed and the curtains were drawn, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I typed a message to Shadow Walker asking him how he knew all these things. His response sent a wave of fear through me. "I've been watching you through your webcam." Panic set in. I quickly covered the webcam with a piece of tape, my hands shaking. I felt exposed and vulnerable. I typed back furiously, demanding to know how he had done it. He responded calmly, explaining that he had hacked into my computer and gained access to my webcam. He had been spying on me for weeks, watching my every move. I felt sick to my stomach. I had heard stories about hackers and online predators, but I never thought it would happen to me. The thought of someone watching me in my own home was terrifying. I ran to the window and looked outside. The street was dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me. I called my parents, my voice trembling as I told them what had happened. They rushed home immediately and my dad called the police. I sat in the living room, my hands still shaking, as I waited for them to arrive. The police took my computer as evidence and assured me they would do everything they could to find the person responsible. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stopped using my computer, and I avoided being alone in my room. My parents were supportive, but the experience had left a deep scar. The police eventually traced the hacker's IP address to another state, but they were never able to catch him. The fear of being watched stayed with me, haunting my thoughts and dreams. A decade has passed since that night, but the memory is still fresh in my mind. I am now 24 years old and living in my own apartment. Technology has advanced, and webcams are everywhere, on our phones, our laptops, and even our TVs. but I have never forgotten the fear and violation I felt that night. Every device I own has its camera covered with duct tape. My friends tease me about it, saying I'm paranoid, but they don't understand. They didn't live through that night. Covering my cameras has become a habit, a way to protect myself from the invisible eyes that once invaded my privacy. It's a small precaution, but it gives me a sense of control. I know it may seem extreme, but to me it's a reminder of the lesson I learned the hard way. You can never be too careful. Living alone has its challenges, but it also gives me the space to heal. I have learned to be more cautious online, and I am always aware of the potential dangers. I use strong passwords, update my software regularly, and am careful about the information I share. The experience has made me more vigilant, but it has also made me stronger. Sometimes late at night I still feel a twinge of fear when I think about that night. I remember the chilling realization that someone was watching me, and I remind myself to stay vigilant.